is where moms create learning groups within their homes, and the numbers are intentionally small, maybe about 4 to 6 families, maybe a little bit more than that, but relatively small, and use their homes to provide experiences for their children that are very specific to what they need and the skills that those moms have in that group. So today, we are excited to have Kaisa Crossley with us, and she is going to share what she is doing in Idaho with a group of moms. And we'll just turn the time over to her, let her introduce herself, and then share what she.
Hello, my name is Kaisa Crossley, and I live in Mountain Home, Idaho. And I'll just share with you a little bit what we've been doing. But first, I wanted to just give you a little bit of my journey, I guess, my history. Um, I I have 7 children now, and one on the way. I don't know if you can tell, but um, when I had 5 at home, and they were all 8 and younger, so I had an 8, 6, 4, 2, and 0. Um, I was, just homeschooling. We had homeschooled all the way from the beginning, but I was going along, and I had a friend that said, "Have you ever heard of the works of Charlotte Mason?" I said, "Well, it sounds familiar, but I didn't know much about her." And she said, "I think you would really like studying her stuff." So she invited me to read a book with her called When Children Love to Learn, and it was about Charlotte Mason. And at that time in my life, my thoughts for homeschooling were, how do I inspire my children yet require? Because I felt like they both were kind of needed. Some of my other questions were like, how do I inspire and require in a way that will nurture their love of learning and want them to take ownership of their education. And I was also really trying to figure out just how to do it with that many little kids at home, all under the age of 8. I was really hungering for more consistency and more accountability, I guess, to keep us on track with our homeschool. But at the same time, I didn't want to give up all the flexibility that we had. And so I was looking for some help in that direction. And I was also looking for a way to expand my own mind and get more into my own mind and heart so that I could share with my children, which I felt like I never had time to do because I had so many little children at home because I was trying to teach. So when I went to a Charlotte Mason conference, and I read this book, and I just had all these really epiphany learning experiences. It was really eye-opening for me. I feel like I started finding answers, but the answers that I found were in principles. And so I wanted to just take a little second to talk about that. I was always looking for a specific answer before, but when I went to this conference and I learned who Charlotte Mason was, I discovered this concept of principles. So um, Charlotte Mason, let me tell you just a little bit of background about her. She lived from 1842 to 1923. She was a British educator, and she taught for 10 years, and then she taught at a teacher's college, and then she ended up opening her own teacher's college, um, and teaching the truths that she had learned. And I feel like the gift that she really gave the world was, she had this philosophy, this theory that just like there are natural laws in the world, natural physical laws for everything that governs what we do, there are also laws that govern learning and education. And when we can take hold on one of those natural laws or true principles, It can be tested and tried in any circumstance, and it will work because it's the way God has designed us as his children to learn. And so I realized that when I find principles and I have those in my heart and I understand them, I can use those principles to navigate me through all of the questions of homeschooling and what to do for this child and how to navigate this and all of these different things. And um, that is what she did. That was her gift to the world, was studying and applying and finding ways to explain to other moms and other educators what these, she calls them laws of learning, are, that are just laws of truth. And it's really neat. When I started learning one of these laws, I would see it everywhere. I would see it in the church. I would see it in like some things that I had read on the Well Educated Heart. I would see it in like other streams of education. It just would all come together. And then I would experiment with it in my home and try it. And it brought me a lot of peace because I knew I had something to navigate by and that I could use for my specific family. So when I talk about the quote principles of Charlotte Mason, they're not her principles. They are principles of truth that she has discovered and shared with the world. I like to think of it like Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Well, it's not his law. He just discovered it and explained it to us so that we now understand it. And so we reference him because he's the one that kind of presented it to the world. And so when I'm referencing Charlotte Mason's principles, they're not her principles. They're just principles of truth that she has explained and given, helped us to see that they're there and how they work. So when I found these principles of Charlotte Mason, it just opened up so many solutions to the things I was hungering for. And I wanted to share some of those with you, just the ones that that really stuck out to me, that hit my heart the most. And then I'll share how I found answers through those principles and how those have come into the little small co-op that we have and mother's study group that we do up here. So Angie, are you still there? Should I do a screen share?
Yes, go right ahead.
And Angie, you can stay on, because if you have questions and stuff through the slideshow, I'd love it if you just ask. You probably have the same questions that somebody else might have, and we can just go from there. Okay. Can you see that good?
Yep, looks great.
All right. So principle-centered education is what I had decided. That was the answer. I was like, that's how I'm going to navigate all these things, is by learning principles. I just was hungering to know more laws of learning, more laws of truth that I could use to govern my homeschool. Let's see. How do I, oh, here we go. Okay, so one of the first things that Charlotte Mason said that really stuck out to me is this quote: look on education as something between the child's soul and God. Modern education tends to look on it as something between the child's brain and the standardized test. And I love that quote because I had never heard it in words, but that is always what I had felt. And one of the reasons why I had chosen to homeschool is because I wanted to nurture this whole child approach and their relationship with God. She says, we allow no separation to grow up between the intellectual and spiritual life of children, but teach them that the divine spirit has constant access to their spirits and is their continual helper in all the interests, duties, and joys of life. So not only does she she's teaching us these things that a lot of us already feel and know in our heart, that the learning really does happen a lot by the Spirit. But the great thing is, she has given us chapters and chapters on how this works with math or science or some of these subjects that typically are considered secular, you know, or I don't know, in our modern world, they're very separated. Like, how are you teaching, these very scientific things by the Spirit? And so she has said a lot about how they work together, and it's really beautiful to see the principles that she talks about, how they can work together in every subject. So that stood out to me. And then some of the natural laws of learning that she talks about, um, is, let's see. Okay, so these laws, she's talking about these laws in general. Um, and this is how we can define and understand what the laws are. So she's trying to define this true educational philosophy that she feels like any parent or educator, that if we're going to attempt to understand education, we need to understand these basic laws of learning. And she likes to call it a thinking love. So as mothers, we love our children, we want them to progress, but it's important for us to spend time learning about the laws that God has created that govern how our children learn. And she calls it a thinking love. So these are a couple of points. Angie, do you want to take a turn reading?
You bet. So
Okay.
we know that it is pervasive. There is no part of a child's home life or schoolwork which the law does not penetrate.
Thank you. The law is liberal, taking in whatsoever things are true, honest, and of good report. Your turn, Angie.
And the path indicated by the law is continuous and progressive, with no transition stage from the cradle to the grave, except that maturity takes up the regular self direction to which immaturity has been trained.
Okay. And the best idea which we can form of absolute truth as is that it is viable to meet every condition by which it can be tested. This we shall expect of our law. So what do you see in there, Angie, that, like, how would you describe that in your own words? There's kind of a lot in there.
Yeah, I really was struck by that third one down, that it's this continuous. So often we think of learning and school as something we do from 5 to 18, and then after that I have so many friends who haven't read, they don't want to pick up a single book after they graduate from high school because they're just, that love and hunger of learning was just beat out of them. But it's this, that is the process of life, to continue constantly learning. And I love that it's just that the maturity, um, the self-direction comes after that immaturity has been trained. And what does that look like? And how does that work? And that's why you're here today.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, it's true. And um, the more that I study about learning and education, and specifically that third one, learning is a source of joy that our Heavenly Father has given to us. And when we are learning, it is joyful. And, it's just that simple. If we're wanting some more joy and refreshment and, you know, life in our life, even as mothers, something that we can consider is, are we feeding our minds? Are we feeding ourselves intellectually? And that was an epiphany that I had. I um, I realized that I can turn myself into a much better mother and a much better homeschooler if I am feeding my own intellect, even if it's just in small degrees, because I know, as a busy mom with lots of littles at home, you think, oh gosh, how am I having time to sit down and study and all of these things? But there are lots of ways that we can intellectually be feeding our minds. And it is a true source of joy. And when our children, they just naturally have that as little children, but it can be squished out of them and kind of killed. And that's one thing that we want to preserve is God gave them this desire to learn. And it's our job to preserve that natural love for learning. So this principle, children are born persons. It sounds so, I guess, easy to just be like, well, of course, children are born persons. But the more that I read about what she was trying to say here, I just kept having these little light bulb moments. So she says, every child is born with every capacity for good or evil. And each child has tendencies that can be nurtured or overcome. So she is really wanting us to understand and to view our children in the correct light, because how we view our children as we're teaching them really affects how we teach, what we, how we expect them to learn really has a lot to do with how we view them. And so she wants us to see that every child has this capacity to learn, and they also have capacities for good or capacities for evil. They're not born necessarily one way or the other, but part of education is, like in the second bullet, is nurturing their good tendencies and helping them to develop those tendencies that would incline them towards good, and helping them to inhibit any negative tendencies that they have. And everyone has both. And that's another reason why the mother is most well equipped to educate her children, is because God has laid it upon her heart who this child is. From the day they're born, we're learning what this child's tendencies are for good or for evil. What are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, and how can I help them? And that is part of education. So she says, as educators and parents, we must respect the personality of children. They must not be encroached upon, whether by fear or love, suggestion or influence, or undue play upon any one natural desire. What are your thoughts about this part, Angie?
Well, I have been reading a book, and I'm sorry that I can't recall the name of the woman who wrote it, but she has 10 children, and she was in a stage of life where her oldest few were out of the house, and she'd homeschooled, and she was talking about this process of teaching and raising and training your children. And she said it's been interesting to watch the 3 children who'd already left the house. She said each of them went into a field according to their weakness. She said the son who stuttered ended up going into public speaking. The daughter who, and I can't remember the other two, what their weaknesses were, but it was just really interesting. She said that's where they were drawn to. And it actually, our weaknesses are given to become strengths, but just this whole fact that we have good and evil, we have weaknesses. And as the parent, like you just mentioned, it is our absolute divine gift to be able to see those weaknesses and help our children overcome. And that's what she was saying, is that as they worked on these areas of weakness, that actually ended up becoming their strength, and where their passion and their life mission actually was almost aligned with that, it seemed. So I really do believe that we have that gift from God to be able to see that and help them overcome the weaknesses and also those evils, and bring out the good.
Oh yeah, thanks. That's such a great example. That's really interesting. And that's part of education, is discovering, well, for the child, is discovering who they are, discovering what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then um, us as the mothers or the educators is to help them know how to, what to do with those strengths and weaknesses, and how to prepare them to go forth in the world. So she says, because we want to respect who the child is and the child's person, she says the only tools that we have are these three tools. She says education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And so let's talk about that. So she says that those are our only tools. And when I first read that quote, I was like, wow, is that true? Like, are those really our tools? Because those are tools that are not, they're not super, what's the word? Active. They are active, but they're like, I guess the way I like to think of it is like gardening. Okay. We want to have a garden. Well, our job is to prepare the soil, is to plant the seeds, is to make sure that it has water and that it's in a place where it will get sunlight. And we control all of the external factors, but it is not us or our power that sprouts the seed and grows the seed up and causes it to flower and to bear fruit. That is God's job, and he does that job. And so these tools that we have, the atmosphere of environment, the discipline, habit, and the presentation of living ideas, is like that in education. It's what we actually can do, but the learning itself is something that happens in the child's own mind and heart. And the only one that has direct influence there is God. And when we start to understand where our influence really has, where we really have influence and where our tools can be used, we can be so much more effective. And it also nurtures that relationship between the child and God, like we talked about at the beginning. So it says the only means a teacher may use to educate children are the child's natural environment. So that's what it means by atmosphere of environment. We can control that. And there's something really magical and powerful about environment. It's like the air they breathe, the attitudes, the ideals that we hold, the things that we believe and hope in our hearts, they all are emitted in our homes, whether we like it or not. And I'm sure, mothers will all attest that our children just know, they just pick up things. Like, how do they just pick up these things? Well, it's just in the environment. They are so perceptive. They are so aware of all the little tiny things. I was listening to one educator, and he said, if you think your children don't know what you believe and what your ideals are, you should ask them, because if you might not think you know what your ideals are and what your beliefs are, but you can ask your children and they'll tell you because they know. They just absorb those things. So if we want them to absorb certain things, we need to look at the environment that we have control over, and we need to look at the things that we really believe in our heart and the choices that we make, and all of those things, our children just will absorb those. And the next one is called discipline of habit. So this part kind of answered the questions for me, well, this and something else, about how to preserve this love of learning with our children, but also have requirements. Every mother battles with how do you make sure your child gets the things done, and how do you do it without squishing them and just being like all about requirements. And so there's a lot to be said about discipline of habit, but the general idea is that from young ages, we want to develop within our children habits that will that will be helpful for their learning, like a habit of attention, a habit of obedience, a habit of hard work and perseverance. Um, and there's intellectual habits too, like a habit of reflection. Um, and we can start to nurture those little habits when they're small, and then we can continue to nurture those habits as they grow older. But the neat thing about habits is once it's a habit, it is natural. We don't have to remind, scold, like all the things. It has become part of the child. And if we can gift our children habits of learning, habits of obedience, habits of attention, habits of service, all of those habits that we can put into our children will bless their lives for the rest of their life. And that is a huge part of education, is the habits that we train our children up in. And then the last one is called the presentation of living ideas. And this is probably the one where most mainstream education like focuses on these, getting knowledge into the child. But Charlotte Mason, her philosophy is that the truth is that ideas are more powerful than knowledge. So we want to expose our children to just a host of good and true and beautiful ideas in a living way. And when I say a living way, it means two things. It means that living, it testifies of Christ. It's going to be something that is good and true and beautiful. There are ideas everywhere. And as children of God, we're always picking up ideas. There are ideas embedded in every movie. There are ideas embedded in every book, in every class, in everything. Little ideas are coming into our mind. And it's the ideas, when we grasp hold of an idea, it will take root, and it's something that we'll think about more often, and we can eventually take action on it. And it's something that eventually becomes part of who we are. So we want to teach our children how to accept or reject ideas, and how to listen to their power of discernment, to accept good ideas and to reject ideas that are not good. But also, and going back to our environment, we want to provide our children with a plethora of good ideas, and in a way that they're inspiring to find. So in a book, there will be lots of little ideas in there. So by giving our children books and experiences that we know are embedded with ideas that we want our children to find, they get to find the idea themselves. It gets sparked in their own mind and their heart, and they will own it more than if we take the book, strip out the ideas, and give them to them and say, these are the ones I want you to know. So she really encourages a lot of reading, and allowing the children, we'll talk about this on the next slide, but allowing the children to ingest the ideas that they do as their person. Everybody's going to pick out different things if they read the same book, and we need to allow our children to do the same thing. We provide them the book, and then we allow them to gather what they will from it, because when they do the work of ingesting the ideas, and they will own it, rather than if we read the book, we pull out our own ideas and give them to them. And it also kind of strips the joy out of it for the child if we do all the work, because in the intellectual work is the joy. So I like to think of it like the punchline of a joke. When you go to tell someone a joke, you set the stage, and then you give the punchline, and then you wait for the person to go ding, and then the joke is funny. But if we set the stage and we get to the punchline and then we explain the punchline before they got to get the joke themselves, it just like falls flat. It took all the joy right out of it. And that is true with learning in all areas. It's true in math, with science, music. We need to be careful that we're not stealing that little aha moment from our children. And it's hard to do. um, like another little example is like if you're teaching the little child to read and you have a younger child and he's just about to like blend his first word and like have this aha moment that 3 letters CAT makes this word cat, and I know what that is, and I read a word and this whole joy, and they're like struggling, and the big brother comes along and says cat, and like it just like robs their glory. But we and I guess I shouldn't say we, I realized that I have the tendency to do that a lot for my children. And so teaching myself to step back and give them the principles or give them something that holds the living ideas, and then let them do the work, let them do the thinking, and then let them come back to me and say what they learned or how it has affected them. And in that way, we're respecting their personhood, but they also get all the joy and the intellectual stimulation because they did all the work. Okay, so we had talked about each child is born with a natural desire to learn and progress. And this is so, it's another one kind of like children are born persons. It sounds really obvious, but if we stop to think about what it means, it can have a lot of implications for what we're doing. And it kind of goes back to letting our children do the work. We need to trust that they have this desire to learn. And if we set up the right environment, it's just going to happen. It is going to happen because it's a divine law. Just like if we put the seeds in the ground in the right situation, it's going to sprout. So let's go ahead and read some of these. Angie, do you want to read one?
The normal child has powers of mind which fit him to deal with all knowledge proper to him. Give him a full and generous curriculum, taking care only that all knowledge offered him is vital, that is, that facts are not presented without their informing ideas.
Okay, what does that say to you, Ange?
That we have the things that we provide our children need to have a purpose and a meaning to them, that they can see that there's value in understanding this, that it's that helping them see the bigger picture, I think, too.
Yeah, thank you. So I like that it says they have all the powers within them to do the work. They have all the power to acquire the knowledge. And she says, we hold that the child's mind is no mere sack to hold ideas, but is rather, if the figure may be allowed, a spiritual organism with an appetite for all knowledge. This is its proper diet, with which it is prepared to deal, and which it can digest and assimilate as the body does foodstuffs. And then let them digest the ideas themselves. Therein lies the joy. And I kind of already talked about that. But this idea that our mind is a spiritual organism, I think is so cool, that it has the ability to digest and pull out the things that are proper for our own selves. And it will be different with every child. So and we all know that if you took 2 children, even if you took identical twins and you gave them exactly the same information in the same way, and then you went to find out what they had learned and what they had remembered, it would be different, because every child is a person. Every single child is different, and we know that, the information goes in, but we digest it all a little bit differently. But if we're given the freedom to digest it and to like break it apart, it will stick with us. How are we doing on time? I don't even have a clock.
It is 8:42. I'm
Oh
sorry,
dear.
7:42.
Okay. Okay. So education is the science of relations. This is talking about a couple things. A child's relationship with God, his fellow man, nature, and the earth, and how their body moves upon, and how their body moves upon it with things material, and all these matter. So this is talking about another part of education is that we want our children to form relationships with things, people, God, and themselves. And the more things that they have a relationship with, they will care about. And it says the limit to human intelligence arises largely from the limit to human interests. So part of our job is to help our children care about things and learning and people and God, because the more things they care about, that's where they will spend their time, and they will continue learning throughout their life. And one of the ways we do that is to be interested in things ourselves. And when we're presenting things, to be interested in them. The teacher must above all be interested herself, and she must be eager to learn. A system must be followed, but the teacher must remember that what the children want to learn and not what she wants to teach is of the greater importance. Okay, so let's talk about how this is kind of a crash course in some of Charlotte Mason's principles. And so now I'll just share like how we've applied them in our small group. We designed a co-op that's for ages 8 to 12. So in taking all of these things into consideration, this is kind of how we structured it. We meet every 2 weeks, which means we only meet for 6 meetings in the fall and 8 meetings in the spring. And we meet for about 2 hours. And the subjects that we cover are geography, nature study, which is the precursor to science, poetry. Well, I just shouldn't say precursor. It is science, but it's done in a really beautiful way. It's like focusing on observation and recording. Poetry, artist, composer, and folk song. We do not cover subjects that are skill-based like math or reading, because those really are taught best individually based on the student's progression. Other possible subjects that could be done in this kind of thing is history, handicrafts, physical fitness, art, Shakespeare, and some of those other things that are not skill-based. So these are kind of the nuggets down here that I feel like have really helped us to be successful. Mothers are expected to attend and actively participate. And the reason for this goes back to the atmosphere we talked about. All of these subjects, mothers will enjoy and can learn from. I have learned so much in my little co-op. I'm like, wow, I didn't know about this artist, and I didn't know about that thing about a geography. Like, my mind was awakened, and because my mind and my child's mind have been awakened in the same area, in the same direction, when I come home, we can talk about it, and it's really great. And then we'll notice things together because we're studying it together. And so when I go to the co-op, I also actively participate. When we go around and we're sharing what we read that week, obviously we're letting the children share their things first, but the moms, we always share. And it's really fun because I see what the other moms are learning, and we're all learning together. We're really experiencing this true joy of learning. And in order to make that possible, no younger siblings are allowed except for nursing babies. And this one was really hard for me to wrap my mind around at first because, like I said, I had 5 littles at home. I was like, how am I going to do that? I have all these other kids. What am I going to do with my other kids? And I realized that I wouldn't ever get this experience if I didn't find something for my other kids to do. And it's only six days in 4 months, I thought. And for 2 hours at a time, I thought they're not going to die. I can find a place for them. So I've done various things. I've invited people to come in my home and babysit. I've found little grandmas where I could take my kids to their house or just different things. And I explained to them it's only these 6 weeks. Sometimes I'll pay them, or sometimes they'll, we do a swap or something like that. And all of the moms just kind of have figured out what to do with their younger children during that time. And it's a small group. We only have 4 to 6 families, which ends up being only 8 to 12 kids. And that is actually really important because then you you can make decisions easier. You can look at the needs of all of the children easier, and you get a more close-knit group. You give everybody more opportunities to share and learn together than if the group was really, really large. And then the last nugget is that all the mothers in our group are studying the principles of education together in order to have a unity of philosophy. And I feel like this is another key nugget is the more we study together, the more we all start to view education and how to do it and why we're doing it in the same. We're more unified that way. There are a million different ways of looking at why do I educate, how should I educate, and those type of things. But if we have found that if we're all studying these true principles together on a constant basis, we always have them in the back of our mind, and we have them for reference when we're doing our co-op and when we're moving forward. And it's really great. And you have this group and everybody's like-minded. So that is another key. So the way we do our study group, and I had mentioned this before, like I felt like I was wanting to have more mind food for myself. And so putting the co-op and the study group together, it serves both purposes. So we found a way for us to study. We tried different things. We tried just meeting once a month, but that was too far between for us anyways, and we were not very consistent. And we also tried meeting in the evening, and that was harder. And so we decided as a group that it's easier to say no to our pillow in the morning than it is to say no to our husbands at night or say no to our children in the middle of the day or whatever. But so that's what worked for us. And so we gather in the morning from 6 to 7 via Zoom, and we just 1 hour, it's done before everybody wakes up, and we've done our discussion, and it's really enriching. And so these true principles are always in our mind. And then these are some of the principles that we incorporate in our co-op, like how we teach in our co-op. The lessons are very short, 20 minutes, that's all, because we want to inspire the children, and then they take this little spark home, and then the mother, after the meeting, during the 2 weeks in between, can take that little spark that she was there for, and she can build on that. They can read together, they can do something else until they come back and they get the next spark that they come back to in 2 weeks. We focus on books that have living ideas in them. We ask the children to share what they have learned. That's a narration. We try and encourage the children to have the freedom to digest and share what they're learning. We don't have a pre-written agenda of what they're going to learn from the book necessarily, or from what we're learning. We just are exposing them to all these good ideas. And we're trying to develop a culture of learning in our homes and the development of habits. So that's kind of what we do. And there's a lot of beautiful ways that I don't have time to share now that we teach those different subjects in a way that's it's a little bit different than a traditional. It's more of a, here's the living idea, what do you think of it?
Kaisa?
And that's mostly what happens. Are we done?
No, could you explain maybe one of the you said, maybe one of those subjects that you
Sure.
or topics and show how you would teach it, just to give an example of how it is different than traditional?
Sure. Okay. So I'll show you what. So we study one composer per semester. We study one artist per semester. We have a list of folk songs. We do a different folk song um every month. We keep our folk song for two-week sessions. And we choose one country to study for the semester. That's geography. So for the folk song, we simply all have the words. We play the music on a little YouTube playlist and we all sing. It's a great way to break up our, just put a little more active thing in there without losing everybody and going out to a playtime. So, and the kids love it. And we learn little fun folk songs. Then we're all singing them together in the car and at home. And so that's how we do folk song. I'll give you an example of a picture study. So we study one artist. Last semester, we studied Monet. So this is what we call a picture study. So at the co-op, this is what we would do. I'll do a really abbreviated version of this, but I would hold up this picture and I would say, and ideally every child should have a copy of this picture on their lap. And at first you give it to them face down and you say, don't turn it over until I say it's time to turn it over. And when I say turn it over, I'm going to give you 1 minute to study this picture. And I want you to look at everything you can see in this picture and tell me at the end what you noticed. And so then I'll hold up the picture, they'll turn theirs over, and everybody will look at their picture for 60 seconds. And then you let them look. And then you're going to cover it back up again. And then you'll ask them, what did you notice? And one kid will say, well, I noticed there was water. They're all going to notice something different. Some kids will notice really teeny tiny details. And they get to hear all the things that the other kids noticed. And then they're like dying to see the picture again. So at the end, after everyone has shared, then you say, okay, let's all turn over our pictures again. You turn them over again, and then everyone can ooh and ah at it again for a minute and be like, oh yeah, there is a little man over there on the island, or oh yeah, there is a boat right there. I didn't notice that before. And so what we're doing is we're teaching them to be familiar with this beautiful artwork. So they're forming a relation with it. If they ever saw this picture again, they would recognize it. They'd be like, hey, I know that picture. They're forming a relation with it, but then you're also developing their powers of observation and their abilities to narrate, which are intellectual habits that will bless them in all the other things that they learn. So once you've done it, so we would do one picture at 1 2-week lesson. Then you would go home and you'd put this picture up in your home, and it would just stay there and it would just be on the wall, and they would just see it all the time, and they could go look at it all the time, anytime they want. And they would get really familiar with this picture because they studied it. It's on their wall. And then after you've done that portion, then you would read a little section about the picture if you can find it. So like, let me see about that picture. That's Claude Monet. And you would read about La Grenouillière, or the Frog Pool, was a resort on the River Seine outside of Paris, where the working class could go to relax and enjoy themselves. Boats were available for rent, and the river was the scene of popular boat races. So you would read a little section about the picture, and then you would ask the children, what did you hear in that reading? And they will narrate back to you what they heard. And then you can also read to them a little section from the artist's life and do the same type of narration. So, Claude's mother, a singer herself, we can imagine, was more supportive of her son's choice. Unfortunately, she died when Monet was 16. So you're going to read a little paragraph and then ask them to narrate back to you. And that is what a 20-minute art study would look like at the co-op. Then they can go home and simply put the picture on their wall, but they had the lesson. If they're interested, they can read more Monet, they can look at more Monet pictures. For us, we mostly just put it on the wall, but at the end of the semester, we have what's called a family share, and all of the families come together from our little co-op, and we go over all of the subjects and present them for all the families. So meaning dad's there, and we can show dad what we've been learning this semester. And all the other siblings and kids that didn't get to come to the co-op, we present what we learned. So usually what we do is we do one master project. This is what I do with my kids is we'll do a recreation. So here's my recreation for the Monet. How'd I do? Okay. But my kids will, they do a little recreation. Each of them picked one of the Monet pictures and did a recreation. And then at the family share, they shared their Monet piece. And it's really fun. It's really not a lot of effort, but the things go in their hearts. We've run into these pictures before from different artists and they remember them. They're like, oh, I know that picture. Who is that? And then some kid will remember and then they'll remember. So that's kind of how we do picture study. We do poetry. We do one poet. That's the same way. We'll read a poem at the co-op, encourage the kids to memorize that poem, and then read a little bit about the poet himself or a little bit about the poem. Geography is done in a little bit differently. Instead of a picture study type of thing, we study the map of the country. So instead of holding up this Monet picture, I would have them get out their map from the atlas and we would have them narrate all the things that they're noticing about that geographical country. And then we would give them a blank map and have them start to put what we call map points on the geography on that country. So like if we were studying Norway, we would look at the map, we would study it, and then I would say, okay, memorize it. Now cover up your atlas map and get out your blank map and see if you can mark Oslo. And they'll mark Oslo and they'll mark the North Sea and they'll mark maybe 3 other map points. And so every co-op session, they would add points onto their map. Every co-op, maybe they'll add like 4 different points onto their map. So they're learning the geography of the country. But then we also have a living book that goes along with each country. So when we studied Holland, we read The Silver Skates, and we read about how Hans skated through all these different cities. And while he's skating through the different cities, we're putting those map points on our map, or David Livingstone in Africa. It shows where he goes in Africa. If we could find a living book, it goes along.
Kaisa, that living book, is that something that's done at home or you read it aloud at the co-op?
We do it at home. So we'll read at home and then we'll come back and share what we learned. Often the moms will sometimes encourage their kids to make a written narration or an art narration from what they read at home and bring it to the co-op and share. So when we were doing Norway, we read The Little Norwegian Cousins or something it's in the Libraries of Hope. Mm-hmm. And so they would come and they would draw. Well, most of the kids just decided to draw. They didn't have to. We said, you can narrate, you can write something, or you can bring a picture or whatever, and come back to class with what stood out to you from the reading. Mm-hmm. So the assignments that go home from the co-op are always optional for the mothers, because we don't want any mom to feel slaved to this co-op. They're always optional, and they're just really flexible too. So if the mom wants to do something else, it's fine. So in fact, with Norway, when we did that, we couldn't find one living book that we did Norwegian Cousins, but we sent out a list of other books that moms could also look up, and we all picked a different book. But so we were reading the one together, but then the kids would come and be like, hey, I read in the Norwegian folk tales about Thor and this cool thing. And so that kid will share what he's reading about the folk tales of Norway. And we had been reading a different book, and my kids, so because the subject is common, it's really great to get a variety.
Mm-hmm. Another question is, who teaches the subjects? Does each mom take a turn? Do you lead everything? How have you done that?
We have a meeting at the beginning of the year, usually in July or August. No, actually, we've gotten better. We've been meeting in June. So we have all summer to prepare. So in June, May or June, at the end of the previous year, we pick out our subjects. And then as fast as we can in the summer, we decide what we're going to study for that subject and the materials and the books that need to get ordered. And so we can order them. So every mom takes the subject. And so like if I took geography, I would say, we'd like to read this living book and study this country. Are you guys okay with that? Or do you have anything else you want to do? And it's pretty easy to get votes from 4 to 6 moms to align, which is the nice thing. So then I will usually order all the materials for everyone, and they'll just pay me. And then the mom that is over picture study, she will usually order all that materials, and I just pay her. We do a little bit of swapping of monies around, but yeah, and we divide it that way.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have for now.
So thank you.
Oh, is that it?
Well, I don't know if you have other questions. That's just what we do.
On and on. Okay. Wow. I have a page of notes here. I don't know if you can see my notes, but really, really appreciate how you started this discussion with principals and how you've applied them in your mom's school. And it sounds like you've got, how long have you been doing this? How many years now?
Since 2017. So 5 years. We're on our 5th year.
And has it been the same families the whole time, or people kind of come and gone?
We've had a couple of families come and go. We usually lose one and gain one about every year or so, just different family situations or things. But we've had a core of us, at least 3 of us, that have been doing it the whole time. And we're getting really fast at it, like our planning, because it's been working so well. When we get together for our planning meeting, we're like, okay, what's the artist? What's the poet? You know, which country do we want to do? Who's taking what? We order our materials. And because we've streamlined how we present the stuff at the co-op, it also takes a lot of the work out of it. So yeah.
So the first year that you did this, were you teaching everything to try and cast the vision to show everyone what it could look like, or did everyone kind of learn together as you went along?
I did kind of a sample class for the moms. Okay. So I invited them over. I said, I'd like to start this Charlotte Mason focused co-op. And I did a picture study with the moms. I did a poetry. I did all of the ways that I did all the ways to teach, because they're not like conventional. They were really different for me. And that's how I learned them, is I went to a sample class as if I was the student. I went to they called it a simulation or something, and I participated in a picture study, and I was like, oh, this was so great. And I participated in a geography study, and so I came home and I did that for the moms and kind of presented some of the principles that Charlotte Mason has brought to light and invited them to join. And I said, you know, in order for us to be unified, we all need to agree that we're going to study these principles that are laid out and taught by Charlotte Mason. But like I said before, it's not like her material. Right. It's just, they're just principles, but we study her works together. And so everybody was like, sure, it's great. And then we figured it out.
So do you, as moms, do you participate in any kind of conferences that you found together, or is this studying these principles like this, has that been enough, or what else do you do for yourself to be able to continue to feed your mind and your heart so that you're prepared to teach your children? Has this been enough, reading these 10 pages and discussing every week? Or what else would you?
Um, yeah, it actually has been really great. When I first learned about Charlotte Mason, I was going to lots of conferences and trying to figure out all the things like how do I actually apply these principles. And then I decided I just needed to read her volumes. And once I started reading her volumes for myself with a small discussion group, our mothers,
Mhm.
it answers all my questions in her reading herself. Like I really didn't need, I enjoy reading an article here or there or looking up a thing here or there, but I don't feel as drawn to going to the presentations and the conferences as I did before because I'm reading the same stuff that they're presenting on. And we have such great discussions with the moms. It's so inspiring. And we do it on such a regular basis that the inspiration is always coming, like,
Mhm.
because it's weekly. So it's really filled a good need that way. Um, the Sometimes, when we switch subjects in the TBG co-op,
Mhm.
like I used to always teach geography, and just recently we switched it up, and a different mom took geography. And because she hadn't had her mind in geography, she's doing more like, okay, how do we do this geography thing again? And she's brushing up on how to do geography.
Mhm.
So we'll, do that.
Okay. One last thing before we go. Can you talk a little bit more about what you do at your family share, what that looks like? How long is it? Just a little bit more detail about that.
Okay. It's really pretty simple. So we take each subject and we ask the kids, how would you like to present this to the families? Um, and so lately, what we've been doing is we ask one or two kids to present on each subject. So I think we have 8 kids in our co-op right now, and we have 6 subjects. So each kid gets a subject, and the other 2 kids co-narrate with
Mm.
another kid. So for artist, um, the kid in charge will share. He'll do a narration for the audience
Mhm.
explaining who Claude Monet was and what was remarkable about his artwork. And then he would give an example of what he did to learn about Monet. So if he had done a Monet artwork, he would show that for everyone. But we also invite all the kids to bring their Monet works of art if they have done them, and we put them on display in the back tables
Mhm.
so that the families can go along and ooh and ah at everybody's um, Monet artwork. And same with geography. The item that they display is we call it their polished map. So as they're putting their map points on, they'll end up with one beautiful colored map with all of the points that they had learned about over the semester. And the kid that's presenting will show his. He could maybe highlight some of the map points and what he learned about that country, or he may tell a narration from the living book that went along with that country.
Mhm.
Um, the poet, oh, we give every kid a chance to recite a poem. So one kid will do the narration about the poet's life, and then we'll invite each child to choose one of their favorite poems from that poet and recite it for the group. Um,
Is that by
and then
memory usually?
it doesn't have to be. We don't want the kids to feel like it has to be. A lot of them just naturally challenge themselves to do that
Sure.
anyway. Um, And when we encourage them to memorize the poems, we say, next week, oh, every week we have a poetry share. So one kid, or actually we do it by families. So one week at TBG, it would be my family's turn to share a poem in
Mhm.
addition to learning about the poet. And we can share a poem from the poet we're studying or any poem we want. It's just we're wanting the children to open up their eyes to the magic of poetry.
Mhm.
And they love poetry. Poetry is really fun. If the mom can wrap her mind around poetry, kids love it. And that was new one for me. I mean, I didn't grow up appreciating poetry, but I do now. It's really fun. So let's see. So the kids like to have a treat from the country we studied.
Sure.
So we invite, and we just say, everybody bring a snack to share to the family share. We don't say it has to be from the country. It
Sure.
just can be any little snack. So often we'll get a family or two at least brings a snack from that country because the kids wanted to do that. And the folk songs. So we sing all of the folk songs at the family share. So we print out all the words for the dads and the other kids to do. So it will go like, present one subject, sing a folk song, present a subject, sing a folk song. But it's really fun because the kids all know the words and the dads have to read the words, but it's really fun for everybody to sing those songs together.
Love that. That's wonderful.
And it's pretty quick. I mean, our thing doesn't last longer than 45 minutes because their narrations are like a minute long.
Mm-hmm.
And then the songs take up 3 minutes and we just kind of move through it. And then we'll usually visit as families and just hang out a little bit afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. We just appreciate your time and all that you've learned and your willingness to share with us. Are you comfortable with us? If anyone would like more information, can we post your email that they can get in touch with you to ask some more questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. You're welcome to.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we just appreciate your time with us today.
Yeah. Thanks, Sanji.
Okay. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, we'll see you.